Thomas and the Important Visitor, written by Christopher Audrey. It was winter. Heavy dark clouds filled the sky. That night snow fell, and deep drifts piled up in the surrounding countryside. Next morning, Bertie the bus set out early from Farquhar, but it wasn't long before he came back. "We can't get over the hill," he told Thomas. "There are drifts higher than my roof. We were lucky to be able to turn round. You'll need to go steady at the tunnel, Thomas. I expect the snow's thick there too." Just then, a taxi drove into a station yard. An important-looking man got out and was taken to see the station master. Then Percy came and told him that the cutting before the tunnel was almost filled with snow. Thomas and his driver and fireman set out with a snowplow. But the snow was so thick that the snowplow bent and began to damage the rails. "That's torn it," said Thomas's driver. "We'll never get through now." They took the snowplow off, left it beside the line, and went back to the station. The station master came up with the important-looking man. "This gentleman has to see Mr. Kindly," he said. "It is a very important matter, and he must see him today, at all costs." The driver scratched his head. "Well, I'm blown if I know how," he said. "We can't get through a blocked cutting without a snowplow." "A bulldozer might be handy," suggested the fireman. "What about Terence?" asked Thomas. "Hasn't he got a bulldozer thing that his driver fits him in front sometimes?" "Well done, Thomas!" exclaimed his driver. "I'll telephone his owner straight away." By the time Toby has taken some workmen to the cutting, Terence was already at work. He and the men soon had the line cleared, and Toby went back to tell Thomas. Mr. Kindly's visitor got into Annie the coach, and Thomas set off. Deep cliffs of snow stood on either side of the line that Terence had cleared, and Thomas puffed triumphantly through, and stopped outside the cottage. The guard helped the important-looking man from Annie, and both Mr. Kindly and his visitor came to thank Thomas. The guard went with them to make sure they did not slip on the path up to the cottage, and then Thomas, cold but pleased, left for the junction. The fat controller was pleased too. "I said it before and I'll say it again," he told them. "There can be no doubt that Thomas is a really useful engine." The end. Bertie the Snow Bus, written by Jenny Lewis and Christopher Audrey. One winter's day, Bertie the bus was going home to his bus station when he got caught in a sudden snowstorm. The snow fell heavily, and soon Bertie's driver could hardly see the road at all. The windscreen wipers went slower and slower. Swoosh, 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 until they had stopped completely. Bertie's tires slipped and skidded on the road. "Oh dear," he thought. "How will I ever get home?" He wished for a moment that he was an engine like Thomas, who could run along tracks straight back to his warm engine shed. "That's no good, Bertie," said his driver. "We'll have to stop." He put Bertie's brakes on and climbed out of the cab. "I'll have to get help. I'll be quick as I can," he said, and he trotted off down the road, leaving Bertie by himself in the snow. The snow covered Bertie as thought it were a blanket. The minutes passed, and soon Bertie was just a mountain of snow. "I hope they can find me," thought Bertie, as the minutes ticked silently away. But his mind was soon put at rest when he heard a cheery voice saying, "Oh, I heard of a snowman, but never a snow bus." It was Terence the tractor, who had come to the rescue. By this time, the snow had stopped, so Bertie's driver wound chains around his wheels to make it easier for them to roll over the snow. Terence's driver hitched the snowplow into Terence to help him push through the snow. Crunch, scrunch, crunch, he went as he slowly pulled Bertie out of the drift and up the slope to where the snow was less steep. Bertie was still covered with snow. He now looked like a birthday cake covered in a white icing. Eventually, they reached the main road, where he was able to roll along by himself again. Bertie thanked Terence for his help and hurried on to Wellsworth, where he was put into a nice warm bus station to recover from his chilly adventure. When the fat controller heard the story the next day, he was very pleased with everyone. "Things usually turns out for the best when everyone helps each other," he said. And Bertie agreed. The end. Pantomime Pranks. Thomas steamed out of his shed before the other engines were awake. Snow lay on the ground, and he was very excited because it was the day before Christmas. Thomas liked Christmas. The passengers were always smiling, and there were lots of special treats for everyone. Thomas didn't even complain when his uncomfortable snowplow was fitted. It wasn't long before Percy and James bustled into the yard, and there was soon a festive atmosphere as drivers hung holy inside engine caps and tinsel in the coaches. The engines knew it would be a busy day, and they soon set about their work. "Bye, James. Goodbye, Percy," Thomas peeped cheerfully to his friends as he left the yard with Annie and Clarabel. By lunchtime, the snow had melted, and Thomas waited patiently on the siding while his snowplow was removed. He watched the busy platform and was surprised to see a small black horse standing with all the people. That's unusual, Thomas thought. Imagine Thomas's surprise when he saw a passenger speak to the horse. "Are you?" said the passenger. "Very well," replied a talking horse. "Cinders and ashes," explained Thomas. Back in the yard, Thomas told the other engines about the talking horse. But he wasn't the only one who had seen something mysterious that morning. "That's nothing," said Percy cheekily. "At Wellsworth Station, I saw a black pudding with blue flames coming off it. It was on fire, so I shouted, 'Help!' But nobody paid any attention." "Oh dear," said Edward. "Well, imagine my surprise," interrupted James, "when I saw Gordon's guard with his daughter Nancy." "What's surprising about that?" laughed Percy. He was wearing a flowery dress over his uniform," gasped James. The engines were used to seeing different things on the railway, but they agreed this was the most unusual day they have ever had. They decided to talk to the Fat Controller that night. It was dark when the Fat Controller came to the yard. The engines whooshed and chatted quietly. "Quiet!" shouted the Fat Controller. "You can tell me about it inside the big shed," he said knowingly. The yard was filled with steam as the engines shunted noisily into the shed. When the steam cleared, they got a lovely surprise. The shed has been decorated and was filled with children singing carols. At one end, a stage has been made so the Christmas pantomime could be performed by the railway staff. The engines watched happily and quietly until the end. Then the pantomime horse took a bow, and Stephen and Bridget, the Fat Controller's grandchildren, stepped out of a costume. "It was a talking horse," cried Thomas. At the end, a funny lady called Widow Dranky took a bow, and her wig fell off her head. Then the lady took off her costume, and underneath was a man they recognized. "It's Gordon's guard in disguise," shouted James. Finally, the shed door opened, and the refreshments lady carried a flaming pudding. "Ah, help!" shrieked Percy. "It's a Christmas pudding," explained the Fat Controller. While everyone ate their pudding, the engines agreed that pantomimes are a lot of fun. The end. Percy and the Christmas Tree, written by Christopher Audrey. It was the day before Christmas Eve. There were to be no trains on Christmas Day and Boxing Day, so Thomas and his friends were looking forward to a nice long rest. It had been cold and misty all day. Now it was beginning to get dark, and Percy, who was standing at the platform at Farquhar, heard the bell ringing. It stopped, and a little later, the station master, looking worried, came and spoke to Percy's driver. "You know the plantation near Hackenbeck?" he said. The driver nodded. "The plant station lorry has broken down," the station master went on. "They just loaded it with Christmas trees for market at Titmuth tomorrow, when an axle broke, and it can't possibly be mended in time." "Well, what do you suggest then?" asked the driver, scratching his head. "That Percy takes some trucks for the standard trees and then goes on to Titmuth with them?" "Bother," said Percy. "I was looking forward to a nice warm shed." "Joy, Percy," said the station master, "but think of the children who might not get a Christmas tree tomorrow if we don't do something about it." Soon they collected the trucks and the guard's van from the yard and set off. It was dark now, and because the last train of the day had gone, the lights on the halt at Hackenbeck had been put out. Torches by the line side showed where the Plantavian men were waiting. They had unloaded the trees onto a small hand barrow and pushed them, a dozen or so at a time, to the place where they could be loaded into Percy's trucks. "Thank goodness you've come," said the foreman. "Probably safe for bacon you have, and no mistake." The men loaded the trees as quickly as they could, but it was very cold, and Percy shivered as he waited. But at last they were ready, and Percy puffed off down the valley. He clattered importantly through the junction under clear signals, and soon reached the yard at Titmuth, while his men were unloading the trees. The foreman came to see Percy. He was carrying a splendid Christmas tree under his arms. "The men and I thought you might like to have this tree in your shed over Christmas, Percy," he said. "I don't know what we have done without you, and I shall write to the fire controller to say so. Thank you again, and a very happy Christmas to all of you." The end. Post Early for Christmas, written by Christopher Audrey. Christmas was coming. All the letters, cards, and parcels posted in Farquhar were carried along Thomas's branch line to the sorting office in Titmuth. The trains became heavier and heavier. One day, about a week before Christmas, the people at the post office in Farquhar asked for the special train that evening. The station master agreed, and arranged for Percy to take it. That was during the morning. About lunchtime, the sky clouded over, thick and heavy from the east. It began to snow, not hard at first, but by tea time it had turned into a blizzard. Percy shivered. "Just my luck to have to go out again," he grumbled. "I'd much rather be in a nice warm shed." "Wouldn't we all?" agreed his driver and fireman. "But orders are orders. You wouldn't want children missing their presents on the Christmas day, just because you'd rather be in a shed, would you?" They fixed the snowplow into Percy's front buffer beam, when all the mail in sacks and packed into big metal trolleys had been loaded into the train. Percy set off. Rather to his surprise, the snow wasn't bad. The tunnel was usually the worst place in snow, but they reached it without trouble. Percy whistled cheerfully as they passed Mrs. Kindly's cottage, but nobody waved in reply. Crimson curtains were sensibly drawn against the weather, and the warm glow of light shone through them into the snow outside. "We'll be all right now," said the fireman as they came safely out into the valley. But he was wrong. They passed the station by the river all right, but they found in the open land lower down the valley that the snow had drifted more deeply. Conditions became steadily worse. Before they reached the station by the airfield, they realized that they could go no further. By now, the snow was level to Percy's bothers, and a sharp wind was blowing snow off the sides of the cutting to pile up around him. "Quick!" urged Percy's driver. "Back to the last station, or we shall be stranded!" But it was too late. Already, the snow was so thick around Percy's wheels that they just spun helplessly and didn't move in an inch. "Go back to the station and tell them what has happened," the driver told the fireman. "Thank goodness there aren't any passengers to worry about." "No," grumbled the fireman. "Only me. You didn't say I need snowshoes, did you?" He told the guard where he's going, and a little while later, the guard came to Percy's cab to be near the fire. He rubbed his hands together happily. "Whew, make the most of it," marked the driver with a grin. "We can only keep it as long as the coal and water lasts." When the fireman reached the station, the staff there wasted no time in sending for help. But the weather was worse on the coast, and even Donald and Douglas couldn't force their way through. They thought of sending to Farquhar for Thomas, but then realized by the time he could reach them, the snow would probably be thick enough to strand him too. They held a conference in the station master's office. "It's a mile that is the biggest worry," said the station master. "We can't just leave it stuck in the snow." "Don't they keep part of the airfield cleared at all times?" suggested Percy's fireman. "How are the helicopters there? You could take the mail for us." "They never let them take off in this blizzard," objected the station master. They took the hot drinks and food down to Percy's driver and guard, and, in several journeys, brought the sacks of mail up to the station. Early next morning, the skies were cleared enough for Hal to be allowed to take off. He took as many sacks as he could, and kept coming back for more, until the mail was cleared. It was afternoon before Thomas and Toby reached them from Farquhar, and they pulled Percy and his train back to safety. "Thank you for rescuing me," said Percy. I know what you felt like, Thomas. Remember that year when you went to collect a Christmas tree for the fat kid Troller, and you became stranded in the snow blizzard, and you had to wait to be rescued? It was alright until my fire went out, but I didn't want to do it again. Next year, perhaps posting early for Christmas can start as soon as it likes. The end. Thomas and the Snow Black, a rewritten story of Thomas and the Important Visitor by Christopher Audrey. It was winter. Heavy dark clouds filled the sky. That night snow fell, and deep drifts piled up in the surrounding countryside. Next morning, Bertie the Bus set out early from his garage to collect passengers for Thomas's early morning train. Thomas had hardly got Annie and Clover ready before they saw Bertie drive into a station yard. No passengers got out. "We can't get over the hill," Bertie said. "People says it's not so bad on the other side of the hill, but on the top there are drifts higher than my roof. We were lucky to be able to turn round." "You need to go steady at the tunnel, Thomas. I expect the snow is steep there too." Just then, a taxi drove into a station yard and came to a stop beside Bertie. An important-looking man got out, and the station master came to meet him. They went off together towards the office. Then Percy, who had been trying to take some trucks to the harbour, came back pushing them. "The snow is deep near the tunnel," he warned them. "The cutting is nearly full of it. I couldn't get through, even with my snowplow." "Never mind, Thomas," said his driver. "You're heavier than Percy, so perhaps we can force our way through." They set off, but when they reached the cutting, they found the snow was so thick that it bent the snowplow, which began to damage the rails. That's torn it," said Thomas's driver. "We'll never get through now." They took the snowplow off, left it beside the line, and went back to the station. Thomas took Annie and Clarabel to their shed and had just got back to the platform when the station master came up with the important-looking man.
"This gentleman has to see Mr. Kindly," he said. "It is a very important matter, and he must see him today at all costs."
Thomas's driver scratched his head.
"Well, I'm blown if I know how," he said.
"The road is impassable, and we couldn't get through the cutting blocked with snow."
"A bulldozer would be handy," remarked the fireman.
What about Terence?" suggested Thomas. "Hasn't he got one of those pusher things that fits in front?"
"Oh, well done, Thomas!"
exclaimed his driver, and the station master ran back to his office to telephone. Meanwhile, Toby had brought Henrietta to the platform, and the workmen were loading their tools into her. By the time Toby had taken them as far as he could to go into the cutting, Terence was already at work. They were hard at it all morning, but by lunchtime they had a line clear. Toby brought the man back to Farquhar and told everyone at the station the good news. Then, with a very important visitor in Henrietta, and with Thomas coupled to the front and Toby at the back, a special train set off. Deep walls of snow stood like cliffs on either side of the lines that Terence and the railway workers had cleared, and the two engines puffed triumphantly between them. Through the tunnel they went. Bertie had been quite wide, but when they came out into the daylight at the other end, they found that the snow lay much less thickly on this side of the hill. The station master had telephoned to warn Mr. Kindly that a special train was on its way, and he was waiting for them at the end of his garden. Thomas and Toby whistled cheerfully to him as they stopped outside the cottage just beyond the end of the tunnel. The guard and the fireman cleared snow from the side of the cutting, and when all was safe, the guard helped the very important visitor down from Henrietta. Both Mr. Kindly and his visitor came to thank the engines. The guard walked to the house with them to make sure they did not slip on the path, and then Thomas and Toby, cold but happy, left for the junction. When the Fat Controller heard about the adventure, he was pleased too. He made a special journey to Farquhar to see the engines.
"I've said it before and I'll say it again,"
he told them.
"There could be no doubt that Thomas, Toby and Percy are all really useful engines."
"And Terence and Bertie too?" asked Percy.
"Terence and Bertie too,"
agreed the Fat Controller. The end. Lost in the Snow, written by Christopher Audrey. Thomas's driver and fireman watched the sky anxiously. Heavy clouds loomed and lowered, and it became dusk in the middle of the day. "We're in for it," said the driver. "We'll be needing a snowplow before long." Thomas was cross. He didn't like the snowplow. It was heavy and cumbersome. But he remembered that Terence had had to come and pull him out of a snowdrift when he'd been silly about it before. "I shall just have to put up with it, I suppose," he said to himself. His driver was right. Before long, it was snowing, and by next morning, the countryside was thickly covered. Thomas could not go as fast as usual, and his fireman wanted to top off his water tanks at the junction, but they found that the water column was out of order. "Never mind, Thomas," he said. "We can't last until the station by the airfield. We'll get some water there." Among the passengers who got into Annie at the junction was a lady carrying a large basket. Inside the basket was something which moved about, and now and then meowed faintly.
Meow, meow. I'm taking my cat to my daughter,
explained the woman.
She's going to look after him for me when I'm away at Christmas.
Once the train was safely on the move, the lady opened the basket, and everyone made a great fuss of the cat as he sat on his owner's lap.
Thomas stopped at the station by the airfield, and several passengers got out. A door slammed. The cat was startled. Meow! With a swift look around, he jumped off the lady's lap, through an open window, and disappeared into the snow outside. "Oh no!" wailed the woman, and getting out of Annie herself, ran to find the guard. "Not to worry," he said encouragingly. "Thomas needs water, so we shall have to spend a few minutes here in any case. You have time to look for your cat. It can't have gone far in this snow." Some of the other passengers got out to help with the search. Thomas's driver and fireman got out too, but they didn't help. They had troubles of their own. The water column here was frozen too, like the one at the junction, and by now the water level in Thomas's tanks was getting dangerously low. "Where's your shovel?" the driver asked the fireman. "We'll have to fill the tank with snow." Thomas shivered but said nothing. He knew that the alternative was even worse. The fireman clambered it onto the top of Thomas's tank, and the driver passed the shovel up to him. Then he took his place on the ground and began throwing shovelfuls of snow up, aiming to land them on the tank beside the fireman. Not all the snow reached its target, and each time some hit its boiler. Thomas shuddered. "Oh, sorry, Thomas," said the driver cheerfully. "Some children go snowballing for fun, you know." "Brrr," muttered Thomas to himself. "Not my idea for fun." Meanwhile, down on the ground, the searchers for the cat were growing desperate. They seemed to have looked everywhere, but the animal couldn't be found. He was not at the station, in the train, under the train, or anywhere near it. They even looked in Thomas's cab, but he wasn't there either. Just then, there was a shout from outside. "Nearly full," said the fireman. The driver mopped his brow. "Thank goodness for that," he remarked. "This is warm work." He slipped the shovel once more under a heap of snow and lifted. The snow on the shovel moved. The driver almost dropped it in surprise. Then the heap of snow meowed.
Meow. Meow.
"Well, I'm blessed," said the driver. "What a good job we didn't put that into Thomas's tank." They went to find the station master, who gave them an old towel. Then, when the cat had been thoroughly dried, a porter gave her some warmed milk, and the cat's owner thankfully put the animal back in his basket.
Meow. Meow.
Later, in the shed, Thomas told Percy and Toby about the adventure. "I'm glad the lady got her cat back," he said. "Now she can go away and have a happy Christmas after all. But I'll tell you something else," he added. "Take my advice and never go snowballing. It's no fun at all. I tried it, so I know." The end. Donald and Douglas. It was winter on the Island of Sodor, and everything was covered in a blanket of thick snow. The snow looked nice, and the children loved it, but it made things very hard for the engines. The engines often teased old Terence the tractor about having funny tracks instead of wheels. But when it snowed, "You can pull us out if we get stuck," said Percy. Thomas agreed. "When I started work on my branch line, I got stuck, and Terence pulled me out." Later that day, the snow was still falling, when Sir Topham Hatt, the Fat Controller, had some bad news. "Stepney is stuck in a snowdrift near the harbour. He's too far away for Terence to reach him quickly." "But Stepney must be moved, or the mainland will be blocked," Sir Topham told the engines. Sir Topham Hatt sent Donald and Douglas, the Scottish twin tender engines, to rescue Stepney. The twins are very good at ploughing the snow. When it's the last time they have rescued both Henry and Thomas from the snowdrift ordeal, and they soon steamed off as fast as they could go. Their big front snowplows made showers of snow that piled up on the sides of a track. Stepney was pleased to see Donald and Douglas. He was glad to see the men too. The men used their shovels to clear the snow away from Stepney. Soon they were all back in the yard. The fat controller was pleased.
Well done, Donald and Douglas, he said. Take the rest of the day off.
Sir Topham Hatt took the men into his office.
You deserve a nice hot drink, he told them.
Donald and Douglas still had their snowplows on, and decided to have some fun with them. Stepney watched them chopping around the yard. They piled the snow and pushed it around gently. When the fat controller came out of his office again, there was a big surprise waiting for him. Standing by the side of a track there was a snowman. It was big and round and had black coal eyes. The snowman looked just like the fat controller. "It's Sir Topham Snowman," said Stepney. The fat controller turned to ask Stepney, but he wasn't going to say who it was either.
"Never mind,"
said Sir Topham, and he took off his black top hat and put it on the snowman's head. The end.